So first of all, we are analyzing that budget proposal, and so within the next few weeks we expect to have some more thorough comments on that issue. But I think our initial impression is I think we are sympathetic to the locals having a lot of pressure on their facilities. They're really not designed to hold people for a long period of time.
And we all are.
And I think, having said that, we are very concerned that if the offenders who were sentenced to more than 10 years were sent to state prison, that would create some incentives at the local level. And we don't know what kind of behavioral changes there would be at the local level, but I think it's reasonable to conclude they may be more likely to sentence someone to 10 years so that they could send them to state prison rather than having to keep them locally. So we'd be concerned that that 300 number might be a little bit low.
And we will await your analysis. Senator Hancock, then Senator Bell, and then we will move on.
First of all, I wanted to start by acknowledging, in regard to Mr. Hoshino's opening remarks, that I very much appreciate these steps that have been done within CDCR in some of the things over which it had control, like the standardized staffing and the reclassification system and some of those other things. I think they're very important and significant steps in the right direction. And I think the governor's made a number of other very good suggestions in the budget around looking at the second strikers and how credits and other things might be modified for that population. I want to really underscore the need to keep data that is usable and clear. How big is CDCR's data collection or research unit or the people who collect the numbers and analyze them?
Boy, I used to have a more firm grip when I was closer to it. I know that at one point it was more robust. It was, in the tens, and then it was down to 3, and then I know we made a reinvestment in it. One of the managers in the research unit is sitting in the audience behind me, and he might have a concrete, but I want to say it's in the 20 to 30 range of individuals.
Okay, and those are all the individuals in the institution who collect data, analyze data, or do research on what might be evidence-based practices?
Most of that is a central office function. I don't believe we have a big distribution of people out there, but there are people whose job it is to put the input of the data into the system. But the analytical function is a central office function.
I don't know what that means. I didn't think they were off in every prison.
Database systems, we have large database systems, obviously, and then there are, basically PCs, computers, input screens, where people are putting information. If I'm bringing in an offender or I'm doing the Compass assessment and they're at a reception center and I'm keying in the data now, it's actually going into our database system. But they don't, at the prison level per se, actually do the large analytical information so that they can produce some of the information we are here for you today.
Right. So who does and how many of those are there? I would just like, when we get to looking at the budget, if you could let me know who does this,
sure,
prison by prison, but also the analytical data, because I thought the chair asked a very important question about whether we're dealing with second strikers as people from the realigned population, or whether these are new crimes. And honestly, if it is not possible to get good data and analysis from CDCR for budgetary constraints or whatever, either we need to turn to the LAO or perhaps to organizations like PPIC or the Vera Institute to do it, because it's information we need to be able to make policy decisions about what to do. And I have been hoping that we had a robust enough system that people within it could get us those answers. But, I think it's something that we're going to need to look at, because I think in a bipartisan way we have an interest in data, not for its own sake, not volumes of it, but focused, analyzed information on which to make policy decisions. So, I think we could get those answers perhaps later. I'm interested also in population-wise what's happening to women prisoners. We have gone from 3 women's prison facilities to 2. One of them, I understand, is the most overcrowded facility in the system. I believe it's the California Institution for Women.
Yes, that's correct.
187% capacity. I have been concerned as I have read and visited the women's prison and also the women prisoners with children program and some of the women in the community programs, that we could use our money in very effective ways, even though we're dealing with a more serious offender population of women since realignment, but to get more of those secured community facilities for women. And would be interested when the budget discussion comes around to see if there is ways of redirecting money within our existing budget to do that, to relieve that overcrowding. So third, I do feel that the suggestion of sending inmates with sentences of 10 years or longer back to state prison at this point would be an incentive to upcharge and then up-sentence. The whole business of wobblers, why have a wobbler if you could have a felony and get somebody off your budget onto somebody else's? And it would seem to me that before things like that are considered, we might want to look at sentence review, which again, a number of people have said is probably going to be an important element of ever getting our prison population down. And I am hoping that we do get that time from the 3-judge panel so we can do it. But I think making decisions in the current atmosphere that would allow that to happen might be premature. Yeah, and I'm going to be looking, I'm not sure if this is quite your question, Mr. Chair, but I am wondering if you can tell now if you're seeing any disparities among counties in terms of some sending more second strikers than others, and specifically, are these the counties that always sent more people to state prison? Or we'd like data on that.
Yeah, I think the early answer is that the sending rates have been relatively stable. So pre and post realignment among the counties. Again, we have some county level data on that. We've provided that, I believe, to some places who have asked for it. But the pattern is what you think it is. It's gone along the road of convention.
Because if it's the same pattern, what I'm seeing is we have some counties that are very successfully implementing realignment. We have some counties that are struggling. We probably have a few counties that are failing. Now, the question then becomes what the department can do, or what any of us can do to help these failing or struggling counties do the kinds of things that Mr. DeVore was describing. And I don't know.
Well, I think it's an important question, and I think the budget proposal reflects some of that. We all see something, I think, similar at the county level. And again, this is some of the parties that came together for realignment to start all of this are parties that remain together, and I think can come together to address some of those. There are some very, very good things going on out there in the counties, and I think we're familiar with those things. And yet, there should be a discussion about replication and support and what it is that we can be doing to bring everybody along. So that realignment really does stick and hold up, and more importantly, we set the foundation for whatever California has to do in the event. We hope that it gets its 2-year extension.
Yes, we do. We certainly do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bell.
I just had 2 questions. Are you issuing Medi-Cal cards to inmates before they leave the facilities?
I don't believe we're doing that yet. We just started the California ID project. That is one of the things that we are working on. We're having our conversations with finance as well as Health and Human Services as part of our reentry hubs. That's one of the areas where we're hoping to do things like that, in addition to which our other opportunity is when folks arrive at either what we call our parolee service centers or residential
Right.
multi-service
Okay,
centers
I
to be
think
able to do
my
that.
comment is in the nature of, we want all people that leave to have Medi-Cal cards before they leave our state facilities.
Understood.
Got it? So that's, and I think we ought to track this in the future budget hearings. Do you, I'm talking about assessments in terms of the way you assess prisoners. When somebody comes from the county, do they give you enough information from the county in terms of the county? County has the mental health, drug, alcohol, other kinds of reports on inmates. So they give you that information so you can properly assess the person once they walk in the door?
At the adult level, I do not hear complaints that we have a shortage of information from the counties.
Like that they have a particular mental health diagnosis or a drug abuse diagnosis?
The current population today is probably such that we have seen the offenders more than once because we are not quite out of the churning effects of the population that is out there. So there is probably more of a refreshing of the data and the information that we know about the offender.
Well, anyway, my feeling is people change in terms of their medical condition, okay?
Correct.
So I think we need to kind of have a protocol
Right.
on what kind of information has to come from counties in terms of assessments before we receive people, so that we can do a fuller assessment as they come in.
Certainly more information is always better, but we do our assessments. Once they arrive, we have our own battery of things that we do on.
And then the out-of-state facilities, are they single bed or double beds? Or are they single occupancy cells?
They
What
are
kind
a
of
mix,
facility?
but the majority of what we've contracted for are dorm settings.
One person, or explain that?
No, multiple.
Okay, so like the
residents.
court
Some
order
could be
is
large rooms.
that they're basing the population cap on single cell occupancy, correct? 137%?
That's what the design capacity standard is. To break it down, yes,
But,
it's a single
people
cell
we send to
standard.
other out-of-state, there's no game there, right? There's no rule about...
No, the rule, we're bounded by what is going on inside our prison system, what we call the brick and mortar institutions.
But you don't have an agreement with your contract for those private facilities or other facilities that requires a single cell per person, or do you specify that? Okay.
don't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bell, especially for making mention of the Medi-Cal issue. Not only is it the humane thing to do, but it will lower your costs, it will lower our costs, and it will also be very instrumental in lowering our recidivism rate. So you have every reason to really get on that as quickly as possible, because it's wasted money that we're not sharing with the federal government.
If you're going to move on,
We are.
just again briefly, because something I'll want more information about is, I was taken a little aback when you said you just started the ID project, and that is making sure that everyone has a California ID when they leave, so they don't have to run around trying to get copies of their birth certificate in order to get a place to live or a job or something like that. I carried bills under the previous governor who passed the legislature, bipartisan support all the time, vetoed by Governor Schwarzenegger. It was my understanding that under this governor it was happening, and I honestly thought it was done.
I
No?
think it was October that we threaded the last few issues that we had with the Department of Motor Vehicles on that. And so November, December is when officially these started to, I'm going off of my recall. It's certainly
Yeah.
a piece of information that we can get with more precision for you.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for the invitation. If I might, before I leave, because I'm so hopeful of the 2-year extension, that I believe California's done an awful lot. When this case started, the population was 172,000, and we're down to a much lower number and heading toward 112,000. The prospect of what California would have had to do to solve in the magnitude of 40 to 60,000 had to be something that was very different than realignment, which by and large, with a reduction of 20,000, we still believe was the safest, most responsible alternative that was out there, given the challenges that we face and the time that we had. And we're very hopeful that we'll be able to come together again as a state and find our way forward to deal with the issues of prison population. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoshino. And as you leave, you should know you are currently looking at a Budget Committee panel in full support of your efforts in full implementation of realignment, and that we know that we've got a lot of work to do looking forward to contain our population and to lower the cost of your department.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Lofstrom, we owe you a debt of gratitude for your patience, giving us your day. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and committee members for inviting me and including me here today. My name is Magnus Lofstrom. I'm a research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. And as I suspect many of you know, PPIC is an independent, nonpartisan research institute that focuses on the major policy issues in the state. And we are the institute that brought you the good news today that the approval rating of the state legislature is coming out. I've been asked to provide an overview of recent crime trends in California to help set the context for your decisions. And I have handed out a handout with some figures and tables. This information, as well as all the material that I'm presenting today, are available at our website, ppic.org. So the data used here really refers to reported crime, and it comes from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, as well as the California State Department of Justice Criminal Justice Statistics Center. These data fall into two broad categories: violent crime, which includes murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, and property crime, which is burglary, larceny, theft, and motor vehicle theft. Property crime is the vast majority of crime in California, about 87% in 2012. In terms of the trends, if we turn to figure 1 in your handout, which is a long-term trend, it shows our crime trends for violent and property crime for more than a 50-year period. And what we see there is that crime rates in California have been coming down for some time, and they reached historical lows. For example, the decline in violent crimes, it dates back to the early 1990s, 1992 to be specific. Property crime rate has been coming down for most of the years since 1980. And although there's no consensus among researchers what is behind its long-term decline, there are factors that typically drive trends that include changes in sentencing laws, incarceration, demographic shifts, so shifts in age and race and ethnicity, economic conditions, as well as illegal drug markets and the dynamics of those, as well as number of law enforcement officers and policing strategies. And the influence of these various factors on crime trends differ, depending on the crime that we're looking at. If we turn to the most recent data, it indicates that this long-term trend might be reversing, and that this is especially true for property crime. If we start by looking at violent crime, we see that after reaching a 45-year low in 2011, California's violent crime rate went up slightly in 2012. It went from 412 violent crimes per 100,000 residents in 2011 to 422. Nonetheless, if you compare that to the peak that was reached in 1992, it's about one-third of that peak, so very, very low in that historical context. The increase in property crime was greater. We saw that between 2011 and 2012, the number of property crimes increased by 7.6%. But again, as with violent crime, property crime is substantially below its peak, and it's less than half of what it was in 1980, which was when it reached its peak. If we turn to Table 1, which provides crime rates for the state as a whole, as well as each of the counties for 2012, what we see there is that crime rates vary substantially across the state. If we start by just quickly take a look at the violent crimes, we see that the highest violent crime rate were in San Joaquin and Alameda counties, where they were roughly twice the statewide violent crime rate. The lowest violent crime rates were in the small counties of Placer and Trinity, and they are about half of what the statewide rate is. We also see dramatic differences across the counties in property crime. And for example, San Francisco's property crime rate in 2012 was more than 3 times greater than the property crime rates in some smaller counties like Modoc, Placer, and Trinity. Moving on to some of the recent changes in Table 2, I'm showing you
Excuse me, just
Yes.
coming to my attention, since you point out San Francisco, how curious that San Francisco has a significantly higher rate of property crime per 100,000, but compared to these smaller counties. But the murder and rape rate of those smaller counties is exponentially higher in those same smaller counties. Any reasoning for that?
Well, one thing is when we're looking at any one specific year and you're talking about a small county, one murder will have a big impact on the crime rate. So we want to be very careful and not read too much into that. I think part of the issue with San Francisco and the high property crime rate is that it's a very dense city with a large number of tourists visiting it. And we have things like larceny theft, iPhones and such being stolen. So I think that's part of it. It certainly contributes to...
Our police chief has stated that 50% of all property crime in San Francisco currently involves a mobile device.
It supports that notion. So let me continue and look at these recent changes. And in Table 2, what you see are the changes in the number of crimes between 2011 and 2012. It's the percentages for the state and again for the counties. And as with the crime rates themselves, these changes also vary dramatically across the state. Just give you a couple of examples here. For example, violent crime in Contra Costa went up by 11.6%, while it decreased by 3.4% in LA. If we look at property crime, we saw increases by 23% in Santa Clara, 18% in Alameda, and about 15.6% in Kern, all more than double the statewide increase of 7.6%. And just to give you one example that looks very differently would be Fresno County, where we saw a small increase of 0.2% in the property crime rate. So moving on to the issue, or potential issue of realignment. With this recent reversal of the statewide crime trend coinciding with the implementation of the public safety realignment in 2011, questions certainly have been raised of the role of the reform here in these crime trends. And I think it's fair to say that what is primarily motivating these concerns is an increase in so-called street time among offenders, which can be put differently, that it's a decrease in our reliance on incarceration. In our research, we produced a report that was published in June of last year. We show that there are about 18,000 offenders who in past years would have been in either prison or jail are not incarcerated now as a result of realignment. The same research shows that these changes did not affect the counties equally. Counties that relied more heavily on the state prison system saw bigger increases in offender street time, and this was especially true in the counties that faced serious jail capacity constraints, including the 18 counties that were under court-ordered jail population caps. So in our most recent research, in the report that was included in the packet today, which was published last month, we assessed to what extent realignment is contributing to these recent increases in crime. And I think it's worthwhile talking for a couple of minutes at least about how we go about answering this rather difficult question. So we go about this in a number of ways, and our primary approach here is to compare the changes that were caused by realignment in the county incarceration rates to the changes in the crime rates. And these are things that differ across the counties, allows us to compare counties to counties, but it also changes over time. And we have monthly data, so we can look at these changes as they take place within a county. We also, in our approach here, address and control for a number of other potentially confounding factors. We examine the sensitivity to some of the issues like changes in law enforcement officers, the role of economic conditions, and we find no sensitivity to those things to the results that I'll be presenting here today. So really, the strategy here focuses on examining the potential effect of changes in street time on crime. But we also, to increase our confidence in these results, and also to put these results in the context of the national changes, we compare California's crime trends to those of other states. In this comprehensive analysis, we find no convincing evidence that realignment has contributed to increases in violent crime so far. So if we turn to figure 2 in your handout, what we see there is a comparison of California's violent crime trend, where we match it up to states that had similar violent crime trends to California prior to realignment. And as you see, they match up quite well. And we see that they continue to match up quite well after realignment. These recent modest increases that we see in violent crime is something that is observed in a number of other states, including those states that we think are the best comparison to California, and they're part of some broader trend. In contrast, if we turn to figure 3, if we look at property crime, this analysis provides strong evidence of an increase in property crime that is caused by realignment. So here in figure 3, you see that when we compare the state's trend, California's trend, to a set of comparable states, we see that California's property crime trend matches up very well before realignment, but then we see it starting to diverge in 2011. As I mentioned before, our primary approach here is really to rely on the county-level data, monthly data. And in our analysis of this, the county crime and incarceration data, it supports what we see in the analysis of the state trends. Figure 4, what I'm showing you there are the orange dots in that figure represents the estimated number of crimes per offender not incarcerated as a result of realignment. And we do this for each of the crime categories that I talked about before. And what this figure shows is that the changes in incarceration rates caused by realignment have not had an increase in violent crime. I should point out that the black bars represent, or the black arrows represent the margin of error of these estimates. So a long bar suggests that it's imprecisely estimated. Very short bars, or the ones that are very difficult to see, means that it's a precisely estimated one. If that black bar doesn't cross the zero line, the horizontal zero line, it is statistically significant. And what we see there, if you look at the violent estimates on the violent crime rate, you see that they're all zero, and they're precisely estimated. So it gives us a lot of confidence that we're not saying that there's no impact on violent crime because there's uncertainty about the estimates. These are what we would call precisely estimated zeros. But you see a different story when you look at the property crime rates, and particularly auto theft. We estimate an additional 1.2 motor vehicle thefts per year for each offender not incarcerated as a result of realignment. And we can use these estimates, as well as statewide estimates, to translate them to what kind of impact they had on the auto theft crime rate. And it's an increase of about 65. And to put that into context, it's maybe even more easily understood. It's about 24,000 more auto thefts per year. But even with that in mind, it's worth noting that what we had seen was a strong long-term decline in auto theft rates. That trend was reversed with realignment, and we're now at the levels that we saw as recently as 2009. These estimates can also be used to compare the cost of incarceration to its benefits as measured by its crime preventive effect. And this cost-benefit exercise shows that the state really hasn't received a very good return on its incarceration investments. We estimate that an additional dollar spent on incarceration yields only about 23 cents in terms of crimes averted. The limited effect of incarceration on crime prevention can also be seen, for example, by comparing the crime preventive effect of prison incarceration to the crime preventive effect of policing. And if we instead had spent that $1 more on policing rather than incarceration, we would prevent between 3.5 and 7 times more crimes. So, of course, additional policing is only one of the possible alternatives. And we've heard about many of the other ones here. And let me conclude by saying that many of these policy options can and should be explored by researchers and policymakers. Thank you. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lofstrom. And as a big fan of the PPIC, we appreciate all the information you bring to us to give counsel and inform us in our public policy making.